Can everybody see me okay? Am I there as speaker, Rebecca? Okay, right. So, well, first, thanks for everybody for coming. My name is Alun Kirby. I've been taking black and white photos for a very long time on film and chemicals. And about 18 years ago, I lost access to a darkroom and wanted to keep making pictures. So I found this process called cyanotype and didn't need a darkroom. So I started playing with it, and 18 years later, I'm still playing. The origami came quite a few years after that. My children got an origami book for Christmas, and obviously by Boxing Day went, so Dad, can you make me this? And I did, and I found it very addictive. And not long after that, I'd been experimenting with the cyanotypes, doing some very long exposures, so exposures of days and weeks, and thought I could combine this with origami somehow. So I did. But I did want to say first that don't be scared of origami, and with a little bit of practice, you can make something like this in probably an afternoon. Oh, we still need to light. So do try origami. It's full of surprises. That was by Tomoko Fuse, who's a brilliant origami artist. There's a link to her work in the chat, and I'll be showing some other things that she's done as well. So with cyanotypes, I started with these long exposures, and you can start with just normal paper. So here I've got a piece of watercolor paper that's been coated with cyanotype chemicals, so that's ready to fold. Or you can print onto that and then use the printed paper to fold something in origami, so you can make your own origami patterns. So this is another of Tomoko Fuse's incredible spiral things. I've also got this, which I'm working on at the moment. So this is again paper that was coated with cyanotype and then printed onto with images about Theseus and his myths, the things that went on with Theseus. This is for a philosophical project that I'm doing at the moment. And this is made up of about 30 separate pieces of paper put together into this big module. But again, I've used the cyanotype as the printing process, which I can then use to make this module. So that's what you can do with basic printed paper. But then I thought I could fold the paper and see what happens. So I would get the paper and fold it into anything, really, whatever was in the origami book. So a little vase like this, or whatever kind of struck me as interesting. And then when I open them up, I got patterns that I didn't really expect. So a lot of the work that I do in the folding work is with archival tissue paper. So this is archival tissue paper coated with cyanotype chemicals. And I work in the kitchen with these, or on the dining room table. So again, the fact that you don't need a darkroom is fantastic. And you fold this into origami forms like this crane, or this little purse here. So this is a tato. These have been folded for a day or so. And then when I open this up, so hopefully you can see already, this is not developed. You can see there is a pattern on there where, so the exposed parts of the paper, the places in the paper that are exposed to light don't get changed, and the bits that are exposed to light do. And what you end up with if you expose for a while is a photograph, a cyanotype that looks like this. And hopefully you'll be able to see that the interesting thing about this is that there are different shades of blue on there. I'm sorry if my camera's not showing it clearly enough. So there's a very dark blue, which would have been the top layer of paper, and then an intermediate blue for the middle layer, a pale blue for the next to bottom layer, and then a clear white in the center. So you can see three-dimensional depth coming through in a two-dimensional image because of using tissue paper as your substrate. So the things to note with using tissue paper are that it's quite fragile. I always use an archival tissue paper because it's acid-free. Cyanotype doesn't like acid or alkali pHs, so do go for an archival tissue paper if you use this. So getting it out of the bath after you've washed it is the issue, and I've had my own struggles, and there's not really much to say apart from you'll probably have yours as well, but do persevere. Get the paper out, even if it's all crunched up. Don't try to open it, just dump it on a towel, leave it to dry. When it's dried, you can open it and you can iron these, and they go nice and flat like that. So I've got this Origami Crane. I started being interested in memory and philosophy quite a while ago, and the Origami Crane is one issue of cultural memory that I've been working on. And the thing about these cyanotypes made in this kind of metamorphogram way is that it's the experience of the paper that gives it the image. So if you've got two identical origami cranes made from the same size paper, coated on the same day, folded in the same way, if you put them on in two different places, even on the same windowsill, they will give you a different picture at the end, because one will have sun from a slightly different place, or it'll get a slightly different shadow on it, and you get a unique picture every single time. So I can show you that briefly with these two. So this is what an origami crane looks like after it's been opened up and developed. I've made almost 1,000 of these now for a project. This one was probably exposed for a day or two. And then I have this one, and you can see they give very different patterns, even though they're exactly the same starting model and chemicals and everything. So this one was probably exposed for 4 or 5 days instead of 2 or 3, or maybe it had a couple of days of stronger sun. But there's that relationship between experience and visual output is something that I've been examining through my work with philosophers, and has been very productive. Yeah, so you get these layers of color that you can get. The other thing that you can do with those paper negatives, so this was another Tomoko Fusei model. It was folded into a spiral shell, and when it opens up, it looks like this. Because you've got this as tissue paper, it's translucent. You can put that onto another piece of coated, normal cyanotype coated paper, and use that as a paper negative. And then you get a positive version of your negative image. So there are other ways to play around with these tissue paper things, so you can get a nice solid image at the end, rather than the one that's a bit delicate, if that's what you wish. But as you can see, it's a typical positive negative relationship between the two. It can be quite fun to do. I've used that to, for example, using the paper negatives to print onto fabric, and made lots of repeats, and then put those fabric repeats into a quilt. So the process is open to lots of manipulation after you've made your tissue paper cyanotype. Okay, just check what I wanted to show. So the one thing that I did want to show you that you can do with origami and not with anything else is making a kind of camera that will take a picture on the inside as well as the outside. And This is one that I made about 2 and a bit years ago, and is still exposing. So this is an Origami Cube, and I'm going to show you how to fold that and what it looks like. And then I decided to cut a hole in the front and put in this old Polaroid lens, and that has sat on my windowsill. And if you knew where I lived, you could see me on Google Earth. The Google van went past as I was putting this there about 2 and a bit years ago. So the reason it's got a lens in is because the cyanotype is so slow to expose that if you just had a pinhole, it would take, I don't know, I'd guess a decade to get a picture, something like that through. So you need more light getting to the inside to get a picture on the inside. The outside is exposing all the time because this is coated with cyanotype chemicals. The inside is also coated. And when you open it up, the image is all on one side of the paper. And that's the wonder of origami. But yes, I put this lens in so that I could get more light to the inside. I won't get a picture of what's outside our window. It's more likely to be equivalent to a heliograph. So you'll get the path of the sun. So as the sun's rays move across, I'll expecting to see some really strong marks inside this box. But it's not time to open it yet, even though it's been going for a couple of years. So I'm going to attempt to fold this in front of your very eyes. This will be the equivalent of the song and dance. So I've got a sheet of paper here. This one is 60 centimeters square. It's been coated with cyanotype chemicals, and I've pre-folded it. So I guess you can see it's got these different creases on. It took me about 5 minutes to do the folds on this. It's not very long. And the instructions should be in the chat linking to this. And there's even a handy little video to show the final step that I'm going to show you now. So you do all this pre-folding and you get a piece of paper like this. And then you turn it into a cube. And I don't know if you can see very well. I'm afraid my computer's in the way. But this is one, when it works, this is one of the loveliest dynamic origami models to make. So I'm going to push this square over here while keeping my hand on the bottom layer to keep the bottom layer still and push the top layer over there. And when you do that, well, you can see it coming up. So, children, animals, and origami, I think is the saying, is it? Let's try again. I do have one pre-made if this one won't cooperate. The thing is, it does it the first time you ever fold it, but when you open it and try and do it again, it really doesn't want to cooperate. This one's not, something's not working on this side. Anyway, assume that folds into a nice cube. What you get is, well, you don't get something like this. You get a nice cube, and because of the way it folds, the paper folds in on itself, so you get the coated side on the inside as well as the outside. This is one that I made yesterday. It was coated, and I exposed it using an LED torch. And I put the LED torch directly onto the paper for about 20 seconds, 20 or 30 seconds in each spot, which is why you can see those little dots where each of the LEDs is in the torch. Some of them were overlapping these holes that I'd cut in the paper, so that I could get some light to the inside as well. And if you don't have one of those lenses to put in yours, then I would recommend cutting holes in and just leaving it on a windowsill and seeing where the sun gets in, and it'll make tracks of the sunlight on the inside of your box. So I've done this with LED, with an LED torch, and now I'll show you that. So inside you can just about see a few little blue marks just to prove that they are on the inside. I didn't have much time to expose this very well, which is why the blue marks inside are quite pale. Undo the box, and you get this final image. So you can get quite striking visual images from using these origami in these boxes. The folds themselves add to it. So you can see these were the four sides of the box. This was the top, this was the bottom, and this was the inside. And you can just about see those blue marks on the inside where it was exposed. So with a longer exposure, you'd have a much more dramatic image on your inside. So, what else did I want to tell you? So I also wanted to say that the modular origami, so this is where you use several sheets to make one model. You can also make that out of coated but not exposed cyanotype coated paper. So, and then leave the model to expose as that, and then when you undo it, you'll get so for this one, if this was just plain paper, I would undo it and then I would get 30 unique images. Each one would have been part of the whole. And again, that's something that I'm exploring from a philosophical angle, to look at kind of cultural memory and how the parts of memory add up to the whole. And my apologies, I think I've left one of my things that I was going to show you downstairs. But that's more or less the demonstration of how this process works. Without actually doing something, it's very hard to teach origami through Zoom. So I don't know, Rebecca, but perhaps it's better to have a Q&A and get people asking questions about anything that they've seen, if they'd like to see things again, or if I can get if I can give people a better view, or I'm welcome to talk about how I've related this to philosophy, but that might not be quite as practically useful.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Alan. Absolutely, anybody has any questions, please just turn on your mics and ask them, or write them in the chat and I can read them out for you. One question that I wanted to ask Alan was, so you're using kind of, I guess, cyanotype solution in the beginning, and then do you do the origami first and then expose it and then develop it? Is that the process?
No, it's all coated first. So I coat the paper and then fold from that. So somebody's asked that you have to coat the paper in subdued light, but I count subdued light as anything where the sun's not directly going into the room. So I coat and fold my paper in a north-facing room, so it gets no direct sunlight, but it has, you know, windows and doors to the garden and things like that. So subdued light is a very loose term. I'm not strict about the light getting on it at all. You can, if it's too bright, you can see the color changing on your paper. It should stay a nice greeny yellow after you've as it dries, at least. It might change after that, but it should stay greeny yellow after it dries. So yes, I fold tissue paper and watercolor paper, The tissue paper, I hang it up to dry. So you do need somewhere dark to do that, or darker to do that. And that's mostly because it sticks to things, it sticks to whatever's underneath it. So you don't get a nice even coating if you dry it on a sheet of plastic, for example. I find it's much better. I've got just some strings in my studio and hang the pieces up from bits of with clothes pegs.
Fabulous, yeah. Thanks for that, Alan. Yeah, a few people in the chat want to actually know about memory and philosophy. So if you want to talk about that for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, there's a couple more practical things I'll just say in that. So the exposure, so again, the exposure relates to the philosophy in that the exposure times that I've chosen for all these things is usually completely arbitrary. So I know from experience when things will give me an image, but I usually leave them until I feel like I'm going to do that one today. So there's usually 1 or 2 models sitting around the house developing or exposing at any point, and I'll just think, okay, today's the day you're going to be developed, be killed, basically. I think of them as having experience, and then me coming along as the external force that takes their existence away. So for coating the tissue paper, I only coat on one side. It's so thin that both sides get covered. The watercolor paper is obviously only coated on one side. Somebody's asked about composite models. You can look up, if you look at modular origami, then you can find lots and lots and lots and lots of things to make out of modules. And the philosophy, so the one I'm working on at the moment is this. So this is called, let me start from the beginning. There's a famous philosophical paradox called the Ship of Theseus. And I've brought this together in a new idea called the icosahedron of Theseus. So I've scoured archives, as we were talking about before, for images that I could use to illustrate the story of Theseus. So he went and fought the Minotaur, wasn't very nice to Ariadne, forgot to put the sails down on his ship, so his dad killed himself. Yeah, quite, typical Greek story. But the idea behind this is a philosophical idea about change over time and identity changing over time. So the original idea was that Theseus went out on his ship, and every day his carpenter came along and repaired a piece of the ship that needed repairing. And by the time he got back from his journey, every single piece of the ship had been repaired. So is that ship the same ship? And then the extension to that is that what if there was another ship following behind that picked up all the pieces that Theseus's carpenter had thrown away and built a ship out of that, which was identical to the ship that Theseus set off on? Would that be the original ship? So it questions our ideas about what's original, what's authentic, and how things change over time. So I'm working on a definition of authenticity with some philosophers, and I made this icosahedron. I printed out, it was about 1.5 meters by 1.8 meters cyanotype, a big cyanotype with all these images of Theseus on, and then cut that into 30 squares that I built this from. And then I made another one exactly the same, except in positive rather than negative. And over the last month, I've been swapping out modules from this original, or whatever we think of, the starting version, and replacing them with copies. And when I finish in a couple of days, I will be able to build a new one. This one will have had every module changed, and I'll be able to build a new one that's built of the modules that I took out of this one. And then I'll be looking for people to interact and tell me which one is authentic. When does this lose authenticity? Is it after we change one or half or one more than half. So anyway, so that's part of the philosophy. The other one came from the Origami Cranes, and the idea that a normal photograph. So we think of photographs basically because Kodak and others have told us for the last 60 years or so that when you take a photograph, you are capturing a memory. It's been on all their advertising for 40 years, 50, actually since the 60s, 60 years, that you are capturing memories. Kodak help you take memories. But philosophically speaking, and actually really speaking, a photograph taken in a camera or from a camera is not a memory. It's a mnemonic device that helps us remember something, but it's not a memory. And a printed photograph is not even the original photograph that you took. Either the digital version or the one on the film is the original, and the printed copy is a secondary interpretation. So you've already interpreted that memory before you start. So what I did was try and persuade these philosophers that these cyanotypes turned into an object which has its own unique experience and is then killed by unfolding and developing, gives us a visual image, which is a visual representation of the memories it made while it was an Origami Crane. And I managed to persuade the philosophers that was right. So it let us discuss about what memories are and how we think about them in terms of photographs. And then I managed, because I could use this as an equivalent to a single person's memories, then I could start to collage lots and lots of these individual unique pictures together. And that would let me examine things like cultural memory. So how we build networks with other people, or how we share cultural memories, such as football fans might share cultural memories, even though they've never met each other. They might have been at the same game or seen it on TV, or they all know about Kenny Dalglish or Ronaldo or whoever, and they can all, there is something there about cultural memory. So that was how making these cyanotypes and exploring with origami led me into working with philosophers. And I found the philosophers because of COVID and lectures being put online, and they were open access. So I started lurking and then asked a few questions and ended up writing a philosophical paper. So do get in touch with academics if you like what they're doing, because you never know where it might lead. I wonder if there's any more questions.
Yeah, there's a couple. Thank you so much for that, Alan. A few people saying that it's really thought-provoking and really loved that. I personally loved it as well. Yeah, there's a couple of wee technical questions. So have you ever tried to make a Q camera with a pinhole rather than a lens?
Yeah, so as I said, you can make it as a pinhole camera, but I think the exposure time with cyanotype inside is going to be way too long, even for me with 2.5 years. I don't think that you'd get an image on a cyanotype, but I would love somebody to prove me wrong. And if you're going to, I'll see you in a decade or so. So yeah, I would go for holes or some kind of bodged together lens to do that. Or you could put a piece of film inside or paper inside the Origami Cube, but you would need a darkroom to do that.
Mm-hmm. There's another wee question there, Alan. Technical question: when this person has used cyanotype before, commercially available kits were only exposed for 15 minutes. How do you manage to expose things for days, months, and years? You mix your own chemicals to a weaker strength or something?
So it's not about the chemicals, although I would highly recommend buying your own chemicals and coating your own paper, because it will be about 95% cheaper than buying paper. Also, you get to use whatever paper you like. So yeah, I coat my own paper, but any paper that you've coated, you can expose for as long as you like. It will keep exposing for as long as it's out in in daylight. And I started because I had contact frames for making contact exposures, contact prints. And I put some cyanotype paper with a leaf on top. And if you expose for 15 minutes, you'll get a beautiful silhouette of the leaf. But I wanted to get the veins through the leaf. I wanted to get an image of the veins through the leaf. So because I was using a contact frame, a split back contact frame, where I could check the exposure inside, then I just kept it going. And I kept it going, and I kept it going until it looked like there was going to be some detail of the leaf through the, on the cyanotype paper. And it took about a week of putting it out in the sun and taking it back in at night, putting it out in the morning, back in, and just kept going. The other thing that you find with doing that is that you go, so normally you get the lovely blues, but if you expose for, in good sunshine for about a week or so, the blues disappear and you get greeny browns, and eventually you get a really nice gold. The camera has actually turned that kind of color already. So, but I know when I develop that, it will stay a kind of goldy color. And I spoke to a chemist who thought it was it had oxidized something. It had reacted further than it normally does, but it takes a long, long time to get that process going. So it's changing the crystals from Prussian blue to a different form of Prussian blue, and that we see as goldy green instead of blue. Yeah, so after I'd realized that long exposures were possible, I've done ones for weeks and months and yeah, now years. And that gives me the freedom to say, okay, I'm going to leave this, and then in 2 months' time I'll bump into it somewhere and go, oh right, yeah, I'll see what that looks like today, and give it that arbitrary exposure. So it gives a freedom to the process that I really appreciate. So I tend to develop things when I'm in the mood, or curiosity gets the better of me. Unless I'm aiming for a specific exposure and a specific image type, then I like that chance.
Thank you, Alan. And so there's kind of two questions there about, is there a reason that you're not putting the object outside, and is it that you rather it inside? Is there any explanation to that?
In the summer, I do generally tend to expose outside because it's nice to work outside. And yeah, so I do use the sun as much as possible. Well, the box with the LED lamps, that's probably only about the second time I've ever exposed anything using LED UV lights. So I normally do everything with the sun. This one has been on the windowsill. This has been on the windowsill. This one was done outside in the summer. The reason I don't do them outside at the moment is because if you get water on them, then the chemicals will run. Or if you get condensation, the chemicals will run. Although saying that, I have had things outside in the summer where there's been a little rain shower or a drizzle, some good Manchester weather passing across, and that tiny bit of water can give you a nice kind of serendipitous texture into the blue. So just try it and see. But mostly I do try to keep things dry and wherever the sun is. So windowsills or outside, it really doesn't matter.
Okay, and then just one final question, Alan, because I know we've run on quite a bit. Have you ever done prints on fabric or textile? And if yes, have you any tips for stiffening the textile?
I've done a lot of work on textiles, and I've never stiffened the textiles at all. So I recently made a lot of silk scarves. So again, you could use this as a paper negative to print onto silk. So basically, you coat the fabric with the chemicals, and then just use it to expose. So put your objects on top and put it out into daylight, and that's it. I've done everything from small pieces of silk to enormous things, t-shirts, tote bags, anything. Stiffening fabric for origami. Well, if you want to get into that, there's a book that I can't remember. It's called Pleating or Folding Fabrics, and it's got lots of techniques. So you actually stitch the fabric to hold it in place. I've never come across anybody stiffening fabric to use it for cyanotype. If you have to add any more liquid after you've coated it, then you'll ruin your cyanotype. But I had the book, which I've given away, because I didn't have the sewing skills to make these pleated patterns, which you could then, so you could basically, the little Japanese tato, which gives this pattern, is traditionally made of fabric and is a purse. So you can pleat and fold in fabric that's already been coated. It will go slightly stiffer when it's coated with the chemicals, but yeah, just experiment. But I wouldn't add any more liquids other than the cyanotype chemicals. You might change the pH, which would ruin everything, or wet things, which would yeah, ruin it. And once you've washed the fabrics, you can iron them, you can wash them, but the pH of what you wash things in is crucial. So I always recommend that you only wash things in water or something neutral with a hand wash, like olive oil soap.
Fabulous.
But yeah, my kids make their own t-shirts and print whatever they like on the front of them, and they go in the washing machine same as normal, but eventually the cyanotype fades to a kind of yellowy color because of the pH.
Well, thank you so much for that, Alan. If anyone does have any more questions, please just email me, or you can find Alan's
Something asked about this one. This one is one of the Tomoko Fusei models. So if you look up Tomoko Fusei's spiral book, if you can find it anywhere, then it's in there.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Alan. I suppose we'll wrap up there. Thank you. It was beautiful. As I said, this has been recorded, so we'll share this with you guys, as well as sending out some links to some of the stuff that Alan's spoken about today.
Welcome. Thanks very much for coming, and good luck.